We have started working actually in 2003. We did team up with UNCTAD and IFOAM, UNCTAD being the organization that deals with trade and development, and IFOAM representing civil society. And FAO's interest is to work on the basis of common standards, such as the Codex Alimentarius Commission guidelines for organic food. The problem is that there is a multiplication of standards and regulations and certification requirements which are creating trade barriers and difficulties for producers to access markets. There is a tendency recently to have more regional coalitions, and this really stems from the fact that in the EU we have regional standards for the whole region, which does not prevent countries to have their own application of those common standards for the European market. So one of the work we have been doing is to have a common standard for the Asian countries. It's a standard that has started developing last year and which will be ready next year. It includes 12 countries in Asia. And the major challenge is that we are working with countries that have been regulating for a long time and have their own standards, such as India. And we have extremely small countries who don't have any kind of standards, like Bhutan, for example. To put together a common standard, which is like a common denominator of these countries, means that you have to have the buy-in of these countries to be able to work together and to come into an agreement in order to facilitate intra-regional trade in the first instance, and in the future to be a critical mass to have more strengths for their export toward other regions such as Europe or the USA.
The FAO has developed international guidelines for the eco-labeling of fish and fish products from marine capture fisheries. The main reason for which the FAO has done this is because eco-labeling schemes started to be developed in the last 15-20 years as a result of general perception or government perception that fisheries were not being well managed, and there was a need to develop eco-labels to certify that they were well managed. The main purpose of these guidelines is to develop an international standard that will allow eco-labeling schemes to be developed in a fair, transparent, and predictable manner. The guidelines have been developed and they've now been available for a couple of years, and there has been a question about whether or not eco-labeling schemes are complying with the guidelines. As a result, FAO is now developing a benchmarking framework that will allow this assessment to be made. And once this assessment will be made, the industry will be able to decide whether or not they want to certify their fishery against an eco-labeling scheme.
The problem is not the existence of private food safety standards. No, because many countries' legislation requires that the food industry take actions to be responsible for ensuring that the food that they produce is safe. And the private food safety standards are their response to this, their legal responsibility to produce safe food. So it is not that private standards in themselves are bad. It is that private food safety standards developed in a way that does not encourage participation of the key stakeholders, includes a certain amount of detail that can exclude small producers. So the problem is related to the process by which these standards are developed.
There is an increasing demand from countries to strengthen the protection against unregulated standards and against the fraudulent practices in food products labeling and the use of different marks and traits. Strengthening the national legal framework that governs the different aspects related to a standard, who can approve a standard, what are the elements of standards that need to be legally set up, what's going to happen if a partner makes an unfair use of a standard.